old for video games.
You have failed.
The same way, I will destroy you. And my friend is truly dead.
Now this is pod racing.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Graying Jedi podcast. I am Master Urza. Joining me as always is Jedi Master Psyllium Maas and Lord Uther. If you're trying to guess our Force persuasions, you're probably somewhere. Today we are delving into the third episode of Ahsoka. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Watch me mispronounce it 3 times or more on this week's episode. And I have to say, fellas, the weekly episodic is delicious in a way. This was the first episode for me that felt a little bit off the arc and a little bit more episode, which was kind of nice. I think we'll talk more about that. But I wanted to kick off our second episode of The Graying Jedi by thanking our Jedis and Jedis for all of the love we've been getting for The Graying Jedi lately. I'm glad to hear that there's still Star Wars fans out there. Who would have thunk? But I have to say I'm very excited because I can't wait to talk about all the Star Wars that I know. But watching something fresh like Ahsoka is refreshing. And for some background on this refreshing delve into the life, stylings, and musical talents of Ahsoka, potentially, let's turn it over to Jedi Master Psyllium Maas for some in-depth information.
Hello there. Thank you, Lord Urza. Thank you, Lord Uther. And thanks to all of you at home. May the Force be with you. Episode 3 of Ahsoka, Time to Fly, is directed by Steph Green. Steph also directed Episode 2, Toil and Trouble. And as mentioned in our last episode, Dave Filoni is the sole creative voice in terms of writing and so forth. This is his baby, and he is nursing it through to its hopefully glorious conclusion. It's funny that you bring up how it felt a little bit off the arc, Urza. I saw this episode as not wanting to call it episodes, but like a chapter. Again, a chapter in a story, much like The Mandalorian. It comes in, it clocks in at well under 1 hour, just about 38 minutes, I believe, was the total. And I think with The Mandalorian and with Boba Fett and Obi-Wan and the live-action Star Wars streaming stories, it almost feels like it's a sweet spot. It's the rare streaming show where I absolutely say I would like a little bit more. Like I'm slightly disappointed that I don't have another 10 minutes or so to play around in that sandbox. Again, we talked about this last week. Part of it is that it's not constructed necessarily like a traditional classic television show where you have act breaks and prologues and so forth. It's just, a continuing narrative that pushes us forward. And so I looked at this chapter as a classic table setting experience. That is to say, we had to get the pieces on the board in space and in opposition to each other directly so that we could do some really cool things perhaps in the next episode and the episodes to come. So in this case, getting there is half the fun, because that's what this episode was. We will talk, and I want to hear definitely from the two of you on the many New Hope allusions that crop up on here. The sort of what I guess is you either go for it moment or you don't. It especially works in comic books and animation, but the sequence of putting your hero out on the wing of a starship and fighting starships with a lightsaber, like, that's the content I'm coming for because, like I say, it's a risk, and if it doesn't work, then you've crash landed on Jakku. And when it does, you admire the effort and so forth. So I think going forward, a lot of people will remember this as Ahsoka on the Wing episode. The thing that I kind of want to lead with here is when we first meet up with our heroes. They're in hyperspace, and Sabine has resumed her Padawan training with the help of Hu Yang, who was the lightsaber instructor for the Jedi Order for hundreds of years, and with Ahsoka's tutelage. And I loved the retro samurai Ronin vibe, that we were getting in the music and the staging and so forth, because again, it calls back to some of the original inspiration George Lucas had for Star Wars, which was the films of Kurosawa, the samurai films of Rashomon, Yojimbo, and the Hidden Fortress in particular. And so that was great. It also, if you're a fan of the Japanese cinema, the Zatoichi, the Blind Swordsman, is another influence that is there. And it's great because you can bring in little moments of levity and so forth, and I think it raises the larger question that we'll want to have you two jump on at. It was only hinted in the first 2 episodes, but it comes pretty much to the forefront here, is that Sabine Wren has about as much force sensitivity as perhaps you and the rest of the council here does, and it's kind of fascinating, right? Because all the characters we've been introduced to in the films, in each trilogy and so forth, it always seems as if they're quote special, right? Like Anakin was, discovered at a young age with his pod racing, and he was ended up the prophesized chosen one. And Rey, the Force, there was an awakening in the Force in the sequel trilogy with Rey. Obi-Wan obviously was very, talented to be, Qui-Gon's apprentice, and Dooku. And we've seen all these Jedi who are really good at what they do. But here is a very interesting narrative lane for somebody who literally has to, use this focus and determination and stuff to simply move a cup. Like to simply move a cup across a table, which should be something you might be able to do if you were a force-sensitive child, while you're still crawling. And I'm wondering how you guys, is this a storyline that excites you? The idea that she literally will have to, learn to use the Force. It kind of reminds me of Luke in A New Hope. He didn't know a thing about it. And then when we catch up with him in Empire Strikes Back, he can retrieve his lightsaber from the Wampa, and but like I say, I think she's even starting from a position behind Luke, etc. So I'm curious, as longtime Star Wars fans and so forth, what you think of this idea that we have somebody who is just, she never would have been a Jedi in the Jedi Order, and she just a Mandalorian on the street.
I feel vindicated in many ways. I love it because I feel like Hollywood is listening to me in so many capacities, because I suggested in another discussion on another show that what would be really cool is if the future Star Wars stories told the stories of the other guys. The people in this universe that are affecting the outcome but maybe aren't the mainstream stories, like your Force insensitive but Force trained people, and not your Finn. I don't care about Finn. But I think Sabine's story is compelling. I think that's an interesting way to look at it, and I love the New Hope references. They were so on the nose that even I picked up on them. And A New Hope is probably the Star Wars movie I've seen the most. Or should I call it Star Wars, because that's what it is. and I fell in love with that movie first. That was the first one I ever saw, so it holds a special place. So for them to echo even small parts of that really tickled my fancy. I also think that it's just an interesting way to move this cinematic narrative universe forward without relying on the Jedi to tell your stories. Kind of like getting rid of the Sith and not relying on the dark side to tell your villain stories. There's plenty of villainry in Mos Eisley. Like, you don't need a Sith. You have the Hutts. You have all these like warlords and gangsters, and there's still so much going on. It's like you don't really need the Borg to tell a compelling story, but that doesn't mean that the Borg can't show up and be the ultimate evil or be pulling the strings that you wouldn't even expect it because it drove so far off the path. I think it's exciting in a lot of major ways. I also think that in terms of the Jedi, they really need to revisit the Chosen One storyline, because I always felt that they missed the mark by making everyone believe that the Skywalkers were the Chosen Ones. Luke being the Chosen One, or Anakin being the Chosen One, when clearly Obi-Wan is the Chosen One. I think there's just so much there. I don't want to go on a rant because I'll wait until we talk about Kenobi, but I really feel like there's a lot there, and I think with the Force ghosts and with the actors who could very well play a part as a Force ghost in the future, in appearing some of these series that may have an impact outside of their immediate story arcs where we see them traditionally, I think could be very cool. I think they have the right writers now, the right people in the right places. Now, have they done some hokey stuff? Yeah, they've done some stuff. This is pod racing, the Gungans. I'm not even necessarily opposed to all the Gungans. I actually like Jar Jar. I just feel like there's more to Gunganry that they could have explored and made it a lot less silly and been like, no, Jar Jar's just this silly, goofy Gungan that you should hate because he's sort of the village idiot, which is kind of how they built him. And if they leaned into that, I might have liked that more. But my whole long story around here is they have such opportunity here, and they've set it up so nicely by hearkening back to some of these, shall we call them, New Hope Easter eggs. I feel like now's the time to really grab it by the haunches and, as Patches O'Houlihan would say, hump it into submission, because this is a big deal. You could really make some incredible stories by focusing on the little guys, focusing on the less important people, not the Chosen One. What about the 8th person down the list? What about the ranks below Jedi Knight that are still technically in the Jedi Order? What about those guys? I think about Andor, I think about Mandalorian, really important figures throughout the Star Wars universe that really haven't gotten their time in the spotlight, but probably deserve it. I really want to know about Greedo's race.
The Rhodians.
See, I feel like, Urza, I feel like what you're saying isn't so much get away from the Jedi, but get away from the Jedi. Yes. Getting away from the Skywalker. So I don't think it's so much, again, I don't think it's so much just Jedi. I think it's just getting away from the idea, like you said, the Skywalker storyline, because that's what all 9 episodes were, right? I think, again, we should probably save this, but all I'm going to say is Rey should have been Kenobi's granddaughter. I'll leave that at that. Hey, you both shook your heads. Yes! Very good. I think...
They could still do it, by the way.
Well, okay. Well, that's actually a theory that's floating around out there, but I'll get to that one in a second. I think they're Let me start with Jedi Master Psyllium Maas's comments. I think they are completely setting up. I'm sorry. This is actually the Urza point. So I think they're setting up Sabine being the next Mandalorian Jedi, because Huang, is that the robot's name?
Yeah.
Was really pushing the idea of, she's not good enough. There haven't been a lot of Mandalorian Jedi. So I think all that getting thrown out there, and then the idea that she was wielding the Darksaber before, like I said, I think I'm going to stick to what I said last week. She's going to wind up getting that sword. She's going to wind up taking over Mandalore. I think you walk a very, very narrow line when you are doing these callbacks to these movies, right? And so it could have backfired. I feel like it worked. I even feel like when they landed on the planet towards the end, that had a Dagobah kind of feel to me. So I think they were doing that a few times in this episode.
And the dog fight. That was very,
Yeah, easily.
Yeah.
Easily a dogfight. And I think I hope they don't kill, I'm all over the place right now, too bad. I hope they don't kill the apprentice Sith. I hope they save her for another day, because I think she could be an excellent villain. She's very Darth Maulish, I feel like. She's all aggression. I want to see that, because say what you want about Vader being a total BA, the redemption arc to me didn't help him be the ultimate bad guy. Sorry, it's a great story, but if you're a bad guy, like if you're one of the most powerful Sith Dark Force users ever, you don't go back. I hope they finally and you got to keep Palpatine out of it, because I'm sick of the Palpatine story. You got to find someone that can kind of pick up that mantle and go with it. That's not a Skywalker or a Palpatine, and I think you have a chance right now with this Sith apprentice.
Shin
Also, yes, I forgot to touch on the lightsaber on the wing, which I really would love to see that set to Pigs on the Wing, now that I think about it, because that's a fantastic song. I also feel like, all right, I'm going to be a dude here for a minute, a dude bro, if you will. I feel like there's a potential love story to be told here between the Sith apprentice and the Jedi apprentice in this show.
Oh, nice.
And I also think that would be a very compelling story to tell if you're going for a gray Jedi future. Because obviously we've got some Jedi and we've got some Sith, but I think both parties really kind of aren't totally evil or aren't totally straight and narrow. And I really think if your future is a gray Jedi path, which I think under Rey would make a lot of sense, I really think this would be an interesting way to tell that story. Now, I promise you this is not some sort of weird fantasy of mine. I know it probably sounds a lot worse, but I honestly think that, in the realm of like compelling love stories, the kind of opposing forces, it's Romeo and Juliet, except in this case it'd be more of a Juliet and Juliet, which is A-okay. I think can be equally, if not more, compelling. And I do think the fact that one has virtually killed the other at this point really would kind of make that a fun way to turn things on its head, because I think they're building up Thrawn to be this great evil, which when you introduce a big bad, and that big bad ends up being so evil that the evil that brought it about is like, ooh, that's a little too evil. There you go. Therein lies the rub. Like, I think that could be, kind of like Vader tossing Palpatine down the shaft at the end. Evil overcomes evil. Arguably, Vader was still evil. He had one little redemption thing at the end. It's like, it's like going to confession the second before you die and getting absolved. Like, really? I don't think you're going to get into heaven. Not to offend anybody out there, but I'm just saying, like, that doesn't jive with me when it comes to narrative storytelling. So I think you have a very real chance to tell kind of a new age love story that would be fresh for the Star Wars universe. We don't get a lot of actual, like, true blue love stories that could end in something not poorly executed because of bad dialogue, Anakin Skywalker, Padme Amidala. And I do think it would be fresh, like a fresh take on how to introduce the Grey Jedi. Not just like, oh, you know, we're mostly Jedi, but we also respect the fact that we have emotions and can love. Like, man, bleh. That isn't as fun. Like, we have this incredible struggle between these two warring powers who then have to unite against an ultimate evil. That is fun. That I like. That's a Goku and Vegeta that I want to see in Star Wars.
Well, and so we've talked about this before. You know, the idea that I got to figure out exactly how I want to phrase this. Just again, I'm sidetracked. I'm thinking of the whole Kenobi, you know, experience when they had the Kenobi show, but you know, the idea that you got to keep going back to some of these things again. I slightly struggle with that. It's got to be done right, like we've talked about before. It can't be cheesy, and I do feel like, and I know Jedi Master Maas just said this or said it earlier, but this episode is definitely setting up the next one. Like, there's no doubt that's what's going to wind up happening. You know, for me personally, I like this episode better than the other two, but it's because I feel like it's setting up something that's going to be fantastic with the last few episodes. And are they only doing one season? Have they determined that?
So we'll address that point first there. This show, the upcoming Jude Law-led Skeleton Crew, and to a lesser extent, because it's not really part of the narrative, but the Acolyte, I mean, they were all kind of greenlit and approved as, you know, single season miniseries, if you will.
Okay.
Now, this show and Skeleton Crew are supposed to have little Easter egg plot points that lead us to Dave Filoni's movie. But the beauty of it is, especially with some of the labor unrest currently taking hold of Southern California and beyond, there's wiggle room to build in more seasons of Ahsoka. I mean, if they choose to do that. There's nothing that says we have to go to a movie right away. You know, I mean, Lucasfilm, the calendar and everything is kind of shifting. So I think the plan is only to do these 8 episodes. And then, just like we saw in Mandalorian, maybe she shows up in Skeleton Crew, or, you know, Jude Law shows up in The Mandalorian, or you start to cross-pollinate all of these characters, and then you get the big screen extravaganza. So regardless of how it performs on, you know, whatever their streaming metrics are, I think that it's probably going to be a one and done, but I think by the end of the 8 episodes, there's going to be a very clear glide path towards where they want to go for this feature. It's funny, you guys. It's funny that Urza brings up this idea of, you know, this sort of love story. The other arms of Lucasfilm in publishing, both in the novels and in the comic books, have run with this. There are a lot of enlightened relationships that celebrate the LGBTQ community and so forth, particularly between women. Dr. Aphra, the comic, the very popular comic, explores this in some detail, and there's references all throughout various novels and so forth that they've published. They've been the most hesitant, I think, in the actual, like, you know, film and television side of things, because again, nobody wants a parent from Jacksonville saying, "Did you have Poe Dameron kissing a," you know? So I think that they take baby steps there, but in other places they've been much more forward. So I kind of like the cut of your jib there as you're bringing that up. Of course, the other part of this episode, beyond the New Hope training sequences and a dogfight battle in space, we have the politics of the New Republic, which is the second big thread I wanted to pull here. Back on home one, General Syndulla is meeting via hologram with the Chancellor of the New Republic, Mon Mothma, as well as several influential senators. And the senators are very skeptical that pursuing this Morgan Elsbeth and the like is really nothing more than just a glorified hunt for Hera's former cell member, Ezra Bridger. So they shut it all down, and that leaves Ahsoka and the team to go in kind of by themselves and do the dirty work. My question to you two, because we've seen the New Republic, after Star Wars Return of the Jedi, Episode 6, we thought the galaxy is, there's Ewoks dancing, there's fireworks, there's celebration, there's, Luke seeing the Force ghosts and feeling, it's a big moment. The John Williams music swells. And we thought, well, that's it, right? Well, then we pick up the story with the new sequel trilogy, and we have the Rise of the First Order and the Resistance and all of that. And then we see The Mandalorian, which is in this same time era, where it's a little bit of the Wild West. You've got bounty hunters and pirates and sort of an anything goes kind of mentality. We see it in Boba Fett, which is also in the same time frame. So I guess my question to you guys is, seeing how the New Republic, and it's also portrayed this way in the comics, it's also portrayed this way in the novels. Is it somewhat dispiriting to know that after destroying the 2 Death Stars, eliminating this version of Palpatine, because don't forget, somehow he's returned, by redeeming Anakin Skywalker at the end, is it kind of dispiriting to see that the New Republic is just sort of a chaotic bureaucracy full of sort of scheming politicians or people that don't have that? Basically, the show's message and the saga's message seems to be that it's hard for good governance, whether you're on the imperial side of authoritarianism and fascism, or the New Republic side. We're going to try and create something progressive and free thinking and the like. And while I know that's not the intent of the creators, they do want to give us space opera. Does the New Republic just suck? How are you guys taking basically what happened, where we thought they triumphed to basically here, which will then lead to the First Order and Kylo Ren and all of that, 20 years from where we are in the timeline now. But do you feel a little disillusioned, a little jaded, a little cynical about how nothing really changes, just the decals and the people in the chairs? Go ahead, Uther.
My problem, which was my problem with the prequels, is it's too quick. Just like in the prequels where you think Ben Kenobi, to me, in Star Wars A New Hope, Ben Kenobi looks like he's 75 or something like that. And he moves like it too, right? So that was my problem. I have a lot of problems with the prequels. That was one of them. Accelerated too quick from the prequel into A New Hope. I feel like the timeline should have been longer.
For the record, it's about 19 years. Like if you're going by what they posit, but okay.
No, yeah. In my opinion, it should have been more of a gap in there. Okay. And I feel like they're kind of doing it again, and I feel like they're really kind of hammering us over the head with this idea that, this Republic can't stay together, but they're doing it. I don't feel like they're doing it for the right purpose. I feel like they're doing it to justify the new trilogy. That's kind of my feel on that. We're going to make this work because I think there was, I don't know if you want to call it hope or a thought process. That they would try to eliminate the sequel trilogy and almost redo it or revamp it somehow. And that it might happen in some of these series, and they're obviously not going in that direction. If anything, they're justifying the trilogy sequels. So I write down notes. That's what I'm crumpling up. So are you putting that in there for the right reason? Is it helping the series, or is it helping me accept those movies that I don't accept and never will probably accept? And I don't think a lot of people who feel that way as well will accept, no matter what you do in these series. to say yes. You know you want to.
I'm actually going to say no.
Oh.
And I'm going to take a counterpoint, which I normally we're pretty simpatico here, but I actually like that they're kind of justifying what happens in the sequel trilogy. And I like that they're backfilling these gaps, because I think that the New Republic was a mistake, honestly, from the jump. And I say this mostly because a rebellion rarely births a good system of government. And I think that's just a historical truth. And I think that's kind of a nice reality check. And that's why, you know, things like a Jedi Order helped bring peace and stability at one point. I also think that regardless of who's in charge, on a galactic scale, there's always a load of hooey going on. And I think the nice job that The Mandalorian does is it really illustrates that there are small scale wins separate from the New Republic that could establish true peace in the galaxy if there was reasonable interaction and coordination and cooperation. I think you have in the New Republic the bones of good cooperation, the bones of something that could be inspiring in the future. But like the scattered Imperials that we keep hearing about, you really have scattered rebels at this point, trying to find an identity. They're trying to form a cohesive government, but they're really just becoming the Second Empire. Because they're filling that gap, and they almost have to assert dominance. And to not break down into, you know, galactic scale civil war that drags on for generations because everybody's quote unquote sick of war. Now on the flip side, Kenobi gives us a nice picture of the fledgling empire, right? Where you see that the empire kind of sucks for even the clones. So, you know, it takes, you know, the good decade or so for the empire to really solidify at least cohesive control. But even at that, you still get planets like Tatooine that are essentially run by the Hutts still. You know, there's always going to be pockets of resistance and pockets of we do what we want here, regardless of the muscle. Now, you're going to get, you know, compliance when you have to. But I think it's just a very true to life situation. I think that's what kind of good mythology storytellers do. I mean, you look at what inspired Star Wars, you know, like Homer's Odyssey and a lot of the Greek writing that inspired Joseph Campbell, which inspired George Lucas, and so on and so forth. Like, you get a lot of this very human aspect that is kind of applied across a galaxy. And this is, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it, you guys. This is why Star Trek is better. This is why Star Trek is better, because the Federation is just a loose agreement among worlds. There's always a little bickering and infighting, but by and large, they're on the same page. And that's why it's a utopia. Although they're constantly in some kind of war or struggle. So it's not a utopia, but, you know, they kind of established that there's not really one good central government. You can't control everything from Coruscant. It's just not going to work. And that, to me, you know, it's kind of the federalist, anti-federalist struggle. You know, if you want to look at it from a historical perspective, which I think is compelling storytelling, realistically. It's very layered, it's very nuanced, and I enjoy that about what they're doing here. Now, do I think they are cognizant of these choices? Absolutely not. I think this is very haphazard, and they're trying to tell a decent story about some attractive people fighting in space, which,
Amen.
honestly, Star Trek's doing the same thing in a way, so it's all good. But I do think that, you know, if because I know at some point they're going to flash forward, and Rey's going to have her rebuilding of the Jedi Order, I think we're going to see a similar situation of post-First Orderdom, where you have a much more solidified republic that's now kind of stamping out the last vestiges of the Empire, which there are always going to be some. I mean, there's still, you know, vestiges of old powers on Earth today. It's just a human thing, and a human is producing these stories, so of course. But I think, you're going to see a real moment where if this new Jedi Order, this gray Jedi Order that's inspired by us, of course, becomes the new light force or the new balanced force of the future of Star Wars, you're probably going to see that become the great peaceful unifier. Or, if they're smart, that's going to be the goal, but something's going to upend everything and throw one big wrench into the dodgeball pit. Because when you have a franchise that makes money like Star Wars, you're never going to finish telling Star Wars stories. And I think the fact of the matter is that the best way to not finish the story is to just have that kind of continuance, where it's like, look, this is a never-ending struggle of good and evil. Some folks are gooder, some folks are eviler. Same thing goes for governments and all institutions.
Well, now I gotta pepper you with this question because it relates to our other very successful podcast called the Warp Core Podcast, where we talked about. That's the whole thing I'm going to talk about. Is Star Trek the Enterprise, or is Star Trek the universe? Is Star Wars the Skywalkers, or is Star Wars the universe or the Jedi as a whole? What say you, Jedi Master Psyllium Maas?
I like it.
Of course you do.
I like the illusion that we're saying, because again, in the Star Trek model, it's that we want to see this crew interacting with these intergalactic story elements and jumping from adventure to adventure and in the spirit of exploration. I think you can't take obviously the Skywalker saga out of Star Wars, but I think the canvas is, from this fan's point of view, has been elongated and stretched and given new colors that, as you say, we can feel more comfortable moving away, feeling like we've told a complete tale of Anakin and his offspring, and now we can concentrate on just all the delicious side characters, as Urza said, or so forth. As it says, it's a perpetual story continuum, and it does not have to die off. I mean, you can go 10,000 years into the past, you can jump 10,000 years into the future, you bring them to our galaxy, not so far away. I mean, there's places to go and worlds to still yet to explore. I think my opinion on Star Trek is it is the Enterprise and how they interact with the universe. But I think I would take the opposing tack in Star Wars and say it's the universe, and of which the Skywalker is a spoke in the wheel. The Skywalker saga is, a spoke in this larger wheel, if you will. And there are other spokes that we can now land on and explore there. I'm curious what Urza would say on that.
So am I.
I like.
We're old men. We're the green Jedi.
Be gone with him. No, I also like. I like the question.
Of course.
Because I think you could argue both for both, and that's the beauty of both of these universes, is that Star Trek is the Enterprise, but it's the human Trek that's being told. That's why I think whenever you try to introduce an alien captain in Star Trek and have them run the show, it doesn't work. It certainly doesn't work as well. Because it's really us exploring ourselves. That's all Star Trek is. It's humanity exploring its own potential. Star Wars, similarly, I think is not Star Wars without a Skywalker. I think that there's potential to continue the Skywalker saga, and they just have to explore the William T. Riker aspect of Luke T. Skywalker. Because there's a lot of years they haven't covered yet of Luke Skywalker. And I don't know about y'all, but if you grew up in the desert with your aunt and uncle, and you went to Tashi Station like maybe once a season, as soon as you get out and you see, I don't know, like a General Hera walking about, you're probably thinking, this Jedi thing is cool, but... And if we know anything about Luke Skywalker, is he was not brought up on the straight and narrow of Obi-Wan Kenobi, which I think Obi-Wan could still potentially be formed into Rey's grandfather, or father, potentially. I also think that there's a lot of underlying love stories in Star Wars that never quite get told. And part of it is because everybody's got crappy parents. Ben Solo, crappy parents, let's be real. It's the hodgepodge, but it's also the humanity of it. It's real life stuff that, is getting thrown into a universe or galaxy far, far away. Star Trek, as a foil, is a little bit more on the nose with its humanity, and that's why, the Enterprise, I think Psyllium Maas alluded to this, is Star Trek. But then you have Deep Space Nine, and you have Voyager. And those were very successful, very excellent shows on their own, which I think demonstrates that you don't need an Enterprise. Now, they both have the Enterprise in it at some point or another, and I think you almost have to, just as some fan service. But in that same vein, I think you could tell pretty compelling Star Trek stories without the crew of the Enterprise. Big screen or small screen, by the way. And I feel the same about Star Wars. I think the uniqueness of both of these, shall we say, universes, cinematically or just from a story perspective, the unique thing about each of them is that they achieve kind of the same reflection of the best and worst in us in completely different ways. And they tend to present it in a completely different blend. I think Star Trek is a little bit more like Friends. Star Wars is a little bit more like Law and Order, if that makes sense. Friends, the comedy of errors. Law and Order, kind of the same story every single time, but you have varying degrees of good and evil, and sometimes people kind of skirt the line a little bit one way or the other. I'd love to see both. Now, Strange New Worlds aside, of course, I'd love to see both franchises vary from that. Get a little bit farther outside the box one way or the other. Whether you're telling Vader's storyline, which could be very, very dark, very, very heavy evil, but have really gleaming points of light, maybe 1,000 of them. And then you could have Star Trek tell, less comedy of errors, less exploratory narrative stuff, and focus a little bit more on building an arc, and do something a little bit contrary and different, which we did get in Picard, and it was very successful. So I think the interesting, just from a narrative standpoint, the interesting thing is both franchises have learned they can really take some big risks and deliver. It all kind of falls to, are they telling the right stories at the right time? And the cool thing about Ahsoka is this really feels like the right story at the right time. It's a Jedi who's very Jedi without being, all love to Qui-Gon Jinn. But kind of beat you over the head with the Jedi-ness a little bit. Did he defy the Council? Yes. That was like the biggest of Qui-Gon Jinn. Otherwise, he's pretty hardcore Jedi. Same thing with Obi-Wan. You get a little bit of youthful flirtation with breaking with tradition. But then you get Luke, who just goes back heavy into the Jedi-dom. He's like, the sacred texts. Yoda's there like, brother, you ain't need them sacred texts. Let me just blow this up with lightning real quick. That's where, Star Wars tends to trap itself. But this Ahsoka storyline is kind of, again, this is our vehicle episode, right? It's kind of driving us to this non-traditional approach. Like, they mentioned in this episode, Sabine would not have been a Padawan under the Order. Ahsoka is dedicated and making it happen. Even though she utterly fails at like the most basic of the basic training session, that to me is like, all right, we're getting a little bit of Jedi, but we're also getting a little bit of, shall we call it elbow grease, grit and determination, is like the Charlie Brown of Jedi here. It's kind of cool. Like I have to say, it's the everyman that we all kind of want to be. We all wish, we could sit there and look at a cup long enough and have it just slide into our hands. We all wish for that. So Sabine is really like that relatable character that is kind of giving us that punch. I mean, maybe I'm way off on a tangent here, but I feel like, again, these are human stories, and this is the kind of punch that both universes need. Like we talked on Strange New Worlds on the wonderful Warp Core podcast, which if you'd like to see that, hit the subscribe button right now. Don't forget to drop us a like and a comment with your thoughts on the stories that are being told in both the Star Wars and the Star Trek universe. Brought to you by Body Armor. Just kidding, they don't sponsor us. If they could.
This is their opportunity to do so. See, I think the Acolyte works because you get to go 10... Here's where a prequel works, in my opinion. 10,000 years back, you can separate yourself from the Skywalkers now. I think you can make that break at that point. It's going to be huge. Here's my issue. You're going to do a new movie, and you're bringing a Skywalker back into the new set of movies, where I really felt like they weren't going to do that. I really thought they closed the door. And they were going to go in another direction. And to your point, Urza, these other these other shows have helped people see that. I mean, even though Grogu's around, but you don't need the main character to, even though Grogu's canon. Anyway, I'm destroying my own argument slightly. They're both co-main characters. Anyway, but it's allowing you to go in this direction without a Skywalker, mainly in those points. And now you're going to go right back to it with the new movie. It makes, and here's my thing, we've talked about this before too, it makes me feel like they're doing the Rey thing because they didn't do the Luke thing right. You cannot tell me that they ended his story correctly with the way, that's a whole nother podcast, with the way they did.
We'll get there.
But I can't wait to do that episode, yes.
Oh, we will battle over that.
We might have to like live stream us watching that movie just so we
that
can
would be fantastic.
record a podcast.
That would be awesome. Okay, lightning question quick before I introduce a brand new segment to the Graying Jedi. Do we like Sabine with episode 1's hair or her current shorter do?
Oh, I feel like this question is for me.
It
I
is.
love Sabine's hair in episode 1. Seriously, I've never been so jealous of hair in my life.
Me too.
With the
I
color.
loved that hair. When she cut it, I damn near cried. Forgive the French there, but
We're in the
I'm
same
passionate
page.
about that. Oh,
Okay,
God, I love her
answer.
hair.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
So, in addition to our Ask the Jedi Council, which we've done so successfully here in this episode, there's also 2 or 3 little things just for hardcore fans to digest or softcore fans to go back and say, really? That's what that's all about? We're going to call them Kyber crystals. And there were a couple that were in this particular episode. Number 1, the senator that gives General Syndulla the most grief is Senator Ziono. And we don't spend a lot of time with him. He's just there to be an obstacle and rude. But he has actually appeared in the franchise before. Following the Clone Wars animated series, following Rebels animated series, there was a 2-season Lucasfilm Star Wars animated show called Star Wars Resistance, which was set in the months leading up to the First Order and the Force Awakens and the Last Jedi. So it was in the BB-8 Poe Dameron era, if you will. And this senator is he actually appears in Star Wars Resistance. His son is the main character in Star Wars Resistance, and the premise of that show is just that there's subterfuge and intrigue as the First Order prepares to make its move. But Senator Xiono, this would be another live-action adaptation of an animated character. We meet Hera's son, Jason, with green hair in this episode, hanging out with Chopper. Jason is the offspring of both General Syndulla and her Jedi lover, Kanan Jarrus, who was an animated character in Star Wars Rebels, voiced by Freddie Prinze Jr. During the show. We never actually saw them consummate their relationship. In fact, the most they shared was a chaste kiss, which I'm sure all the 8-year-olds ran out of the room screaming, "Mom, that's gross." But we learned that, and Kanan, for those of you that haven't watched the series, is probably not going to be rejoining us based on his fate in the show. However, Hera did get a plucky young lad named Jason, who other Star Wars fans might remember. The name Jason doesn't always work out so well in the Star Wars universe, so we'll have to see if that's something there. The large space whales, the Purrgil, we've seen them before briefly in The Mandalorian, and we've seen a lot of them in the animated show Rebels that Dave Filoni created. Essentially, for those of you that haven't really followed the lore, these creatures use space as a whale or a shark might use our oceans. They swim through them freely. Their species has the ability to access and enter hyperspace through those long sort of tentacles that they have, because you have sort of the body of a whale and then the tentacles there. And it was these Purrgil, in fact, one of the characteristics of Ezra Bridger's force sensitivity and Jedi training, he could communicate with and had a special bond with creatures, with lothcats and other non-humanoid creatures. During the animated show, he communicated with Purrgil. He was able to access their thoughts and so forth. And at the end of Rebels, again, not giving too much away, the Purrgil help Ezra defeat Grand Admiral Thrawn, and presumably, as most people are saying, led to his demise. However, this show is going to explain why that wasn't necessarily the case. So the Purrgil weren't just a nice visual touch there. They do have a pretty important role to go in the series. And finally, for the total geeks who know the Enterprise's designation number and so forth, Ahsoka's craft does not have a name like the Millennium Falcon or the Outlander or other show, but it does have a designation. And so if you want to impress your friends at Bar Trivia Night, Ahsoka's ship is designated T61974, and that is the call sign in which that is there. So I don't know if we can hang a moniker on it down the road like Slave One, which you're not allowed to call Boba Fett's ship anymore, but we'll see if it gets a cool nickname before it's all said and done there. So those are our Kyber.
Is that the month and year?
Well, 1974.
Lucas
I feel
started
like
writing it.
no. I mean, he was probably working on it. 74. I'd have to look up Filoni's birthday or something. Like, it feels like that number wasn't landed upon by accident, but as to the actual origin of it, we'll maybe hold that for a future episode if we can dig that out there. So, anyways, that was those were the little things that hopefully you'll pick up on as we go further. Yes. All right.
I like it.
I just want to throw one more thing out there.
Okay, go ahead.
Just real quick. Just real quick. Real quick. To me, the best thing about Kenobi, and one of the best things that's going to happen with Ahsoka, is we're going to get to see Hayden Christensen come back again. Spoiler alert: we know that he's going to be in it, but I feel like it's such a redemption for him, because I thought in the prequels, he was fantastic. I just think, to Urza's point, and like we've talked about before, the writing totally did him a disservice. So to see him come back like this right now and really embrace the character and play the Anakin and Vader role has been some of the best things, in my opinion, about Star Wars. Is his comeback.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, definitely. I will be the first to admit I hated Hayden Christensen in the prequel trilogy. Not as much as I hated Jake Lloyd. I really, really hated Hayden Christensen. But I've learned over the years I didn't really hate him or his acting. I really hated the dialogue.
Yeah.
Although I will say Ewan McGregor took crappy dialogue and somehow made it into gold. Like the whole hello there thing, super cheeseball. But it actually is so bad it's good. Like every time I hear it now I'm like, hello there. Like, I mean, now granted that was borrowed from A New Hope, of course, but it's all in what you do with it. And I have to say, they really dealt, like, if you could get dealt an absolute garbage hand of cards, that was what they gave Hayden Christensen, and they gave him an Uno card to play poker with. So, with that, let us proceed to our lightsaber ratings of Episode 3 of Ahsoka. And I think this week we're going to start off with our Jedi Master, Psyllium Maas.
All right, gentlemen, for the reasons we've gone into before, the fact that you can't really judge a book when you're only 3 chapters into it, so much is reliant on what comes before and what will come next. As I said, this is sort of setting the table, this chapter, arranging the pieces so that we have a clearer sense of what the board will look like. This for me was a blue lightsaber, meaning that it was well intentioned, well executed, but it really needs what comes next to be able to fully express where they're going with it. So I'm expecting big revelations, surprises, twists of fate in not just the rest of the show, but in Episode 4. I think hopefully we're setting ourselves up for a nice pivot into that second half arc of the season. So a blue lightsaber for me for Time to Fly.
I will go purple again. Maybe a little bit, but I'm going to go purple for right now because I really believe it's going to matter what Episode 4 does. But I think it's a pivot. This could be a pivotal episode that sets everything up, like we said, for an incredible Episode 4. And again, 3 was good. The space battles were good. I mean, there was a lot of great things about it. But again, I think it's setting us up for 4. So, purple. On to go forward.
I'm going to go purple as well. I almost would go green on this. Because for somebody who claims to hate Monster of the Week episodes, this vehicle episode got me. It's probably because we got so much Sabine and we got so much New Hope. And I gotta say, I loved the whole lightsaber on the wing fighting. I was wondered, like, why doesn't Luke just get out on the X-Wing with his lightsaber and just deflect the bolts as he's flying towards the Death Star's little port? Stuff like that's always been on my brain. Like, well, they wouldn't do that because how does he breathe in space? Stuff like that. But it's like, this is pretty freaking cool. So it had moments like that. It had a lot of great things about it. It almost blew my skirt off, but I have to say, it is still a vehicle. Like, we're getting built up. This is a 2-parter. This is the first episode of a 2-parter episode. It's the best way to look at it.
Yep.
But if ever there was a great ramp up, this is probably like textbook. I would also like to see Mace Windu in the series before the end of it. Okay, so that has been our second episode of The Graying Jedi. We do appreciate all of you coming with us.
Did the Jedi Master Psyllium give his? Yeah, you did.
Yes.
My bad.
You You kicked it
My
off.
bad. I cut
We
you off.
appreciate you all coming with us on our journey into the galaxy far,
Far.
far away.
See what
You
you
did it.
Yeah. You may be picking up what I'm laying down on these Jedi Zen rocks that I'm raking. But we look forward to the next episode of Ahsoka, which debuts next Tuesday, 8 o'clock Central, or wherever you are. Figure it out with your time based on Greenwich time. Thank you again for joining us on The Graying Jedi. May the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you.
Always.